Whew, we made it. 2023 is over. It feels appropriate that this is my 20th video 2023. It's a nice round number to end on. I've had a really tough year, and so has the planet. The news has felt completely relentless. This is going to be a roundup of some of the year's biggest climate news events, with a little sprinkling of items from my own personal highlights reel thrown in. Just, to remind myself that it ain't all bad. But firstly, thank you so much to all of you, because this year the channel subs have more than trebled. And if you're in the 80% of viewers who aren't subscribed, why not? No need to be a lurker, you know what to do. This year on the channel, I've done some really fun collabs, including a 5-part series with Professor Jason Box called The Biggest Loser. You can check out the playlist up here. And 2 videos with Climate Adam that we shot in person. But I've also heard about some of the latest polar science directly from the source, and I hope that you found these interviews as insightful as I have. Polar science can be pretty bleak, and we've had our fair share of difficult news this year. Something that stands out to me is this paper. I spoke to lead author Dr. Caitlin Norton in this video, where she told me why it's too late to save the West Antarctic ice sheet. The main thing that I took away from that conversation was the need for courage in the face of news like this, not hope. And that's actually how I'm trying to frame my thinking around climate change from now on. More recently, I covered the latest State of the Cryosphere report with help from Dr. James Kirkham, which underlined the need for faster, more ambitious climate action. The kind that we didn't get at COP28, and more on that shambles over here. Dr. Zach Labe also helped me decipher some of the frankly crazy stuff going on with Antarctic sea ice this year, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But polar science wasn't all bad news this year. I covered a paper in this video showing that ozone recovery has actually led to slower loss of Arctic sea ice. It demonstrates how international action on environmental issues can have a positive impact. And while the impacts of climate change are hitting harder and faster than expected, especially in the polar regions, there is some comfort in knowing that at least global average temperature rise isn't happening faster than predicted. And now, let's get into the year's big icy events. We had 2 massive iceberg stories to bookend the year.
The world's largest iceberg on the move after more than 30 years.
A76 was set adrift from the Brunt ice shelf in January and was the size of Greater London. My colleagues at the British Antarctic Survey had been monitoring a crack that had been spreading across the ice shelf for several years, and had actually even moved the Harley research base out of harm's way. Iceberg A23A broke away from the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf in 1986, making it a few years older than me, but it got stuck on the relatively shallow seabed because, as the saying goes, it's just the tip of the iceberg that you can see above water. In November, the berg finally dislodged itself and made a break for it into warmer waters, where it will eventually melt away and break apart. Icebergs follow a really set path. It's called affectionately Iceberg Alley, which I quite like. The major polar science story this year has been with Antarctic sea ice. Sea ice is super important because it acts like a mirror reflecting incoming solar energy, and that keeps the Antarctic climate, but also the whole globe's climate, relatively cool. In February, sea ice reached a record low summer minimum extent for the 2nd year in a row, plummeting to just 1.8 million square kilometers. I made a video about the implications of that record up here. But despite this, nobody outside the polar science community really paid much attention to Antarctic sea ice, until July, when there was an area of ice missing that was big enough to be the world's 10th largest country. We're seeing a completely astounding low in the amount of floating sea ice in the ocean at the moment in Antarctica. It was during the winter freeze-up that this graph started doing the rounds on Twitter, accompanied with the claim that what we were seeing was a once in a 7.5 million year event. Now, this kind of statistical framing is not necessarily appropriate in the context of this particular record, as I discussed in this video, but the fact remains that this is the lowest maximum sea ice extent in the Antarctic by a very wide margin, even if we consider the salvaged satellite data from the 60s and 70s that also shows low values. This year's low sea ice was caused by a combination of ocean heat and weather patterns, and comes off the back of 7 years of decline. It's too early to tell for sure, but it seems likely that these are signs of a human-caused sea ice trend emerging in the Antarctic. But it wasn't just the poles that were baking. 2023 is set to be the hottest year on record. Ocean temperatures soared, particularly at the surface, but also at depth. Unfortunately, we're also seeing temperatures rising in the deeper ocean, and this is because the ocean
sucks up and stores around 90% of the extra heat that we produce as human beings.
Part of this surface heating is explained by El Niño, a natural pattern that raises sea surface temperatures in the Pacific and which can increase global average temperatures by around 0.2 degrees Celsius. And in the atmosphere, global temperature anomalies, that is the difference above normal conditions, reached 2 degrees Celsius for the first time ever. This doesn't mean that we've reached the 2-degree warming threshold permanently, but it does offer a taste of what's to come. Along with temperature rise comes extreme events, and 2023 was packed full of them. We saw wildfires in Canada turning the skies of New York City an apocalyptic red, made much more likely by climate heating. Soon after, fires tore through Greece amidst a devastating heat wave, with news channels showing desperate holidaymakers fleeing tourist hotspots like Rhodes. The heat waves that gripped southern Europe this summer were so severe that they earned themselves an unofficial nickname, the worst of them being Cerberus, named after the three-headed dog that guards the gates of hell. The heat waves also ravaged North America and China in July, killing hundreds of people and sending temperature records tumbling. Rapid attribution analysis showed that the heat waves in North America, China and southern Europe were made much more likely by climate change, and that they were hotter and more devastating because of it. Drought has also plagued communities in the Horn of Africa in recent years, with estimates suggesting that this year's drought was made 100 times more likely by climate change. Climate change has also intensified the effects of drought in Central America, with significant consequences for agriculture and water resources. As well as wildfires, heatwaves and droughts, we also saw wet extremes. Right after that heatwave, Greece and Turkey experienced dramatic floods that killed several people. The very same weather pattern contributed to the floods that swept Libya, taking thousands of lives after 2 dams broke, demonstrating how climate change can amplify existing vulnerabilities caused by conflict and inequality. I spoke a lot about climate change in the media this year, with more than 50 appearances across TV, radio and print. After all, there was a lot to cover, from COP to heat waves to ocean temperatures to icebergs and sea ice. And speaking of polar science on TV, a documentary I worked on finally came out. Lift the Ice is a 6-part series available on Curiosity Stream about the incredible discoveries that lie hidden under the ice. I had an amazing time shooting in Svalbard last year, and I'm so proud of how the show turned out. And it's also not just me, it's been recently nominated for a Real Screen Award. Watch this up here to find out more. I'm still hoping it'll be out in Europe soon, but until then, VPNs exist. And while I'm blowing my own trumpet, it would be remiss of me not to mention that I got an award from the Royal Meteorological Society for my communication work with non-traditional audiences, which I think means you guys, amongst others, of course. So thank you to the Society for recognising the work that I do, especially to bring climate and polar science to people who don't ordinarily have access to it. That's what I call democracy in action. 2023 was a remarkable year in climate, and until we start to turn the tide on emissions and temperatures, every year will continue to break records. The effects of El Niño on global temperatures were just getting started in 2023, which means that 2024 is likely to be worse, with higher temperatures and more extreme events. The one thing that might temper that slightly is the emissions of huge amounts of volcanic ash from the Icelandic volcano that just went off, but to be honest, I'm not sure how much of an effect it will have. COP28 was of course a big disappointment, as will be, I assume, COP29 in Azerbaijan. If you missed them, my 3 most recent videos go into COP28 in incredible disparaging detail. But climate action doesn't end at climate summits, so I'm looking forward to what 2024 has in store for us beyond these kinds of meetings. I've already got lots of exciting plans for videos next year, including a series on climate models, but I would love to hear what suggestions you have below in the comments. I'm also going to Berlin to work on an exciting project with some colleagues at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Potsdam, so I might be a bit quiet in the spring, but rest assured I'll be working very hard behind the scenes to bring you that cutting edge research as soon as it's ready, hot off the press. I'll end by saying thanks for all of your support this year. It's been a wild ride. Big shout out to all of my Patreon subscribers who help me make these videos better every single time, and you can join them at the link below. Happy New Year and see you in 2024.